Everyone.
Good morning.
It's good to have Amanda on this morning. You've been holding down the fort, Amanda, while I've been on my little mini dream vacation.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. We have a great team. Everybody is excited to be on board doing what they're doing best. And so, yeah, it's actually been pretty laid back.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, we built that great office wing up there and we figured, hey, now we just got to get the great team together. And, even though we saw some transition and moments that are difficult, at the same time, we've been really seeing God bring in some really great new team members. So that's been awesome.
Yeah. And I think the office too, I'm so appreciative of everybody who gave to the office project and is still giving. It really has had a huge impact on our team. I've noticed just being able to be in the same space, have those quick conversations in the hallway before we get back to our desks and keep working. Like all of that, I think has really increased staff performance significantly. People are happier. We're just gelling more as a team. So it's a huge win. It's a huge win for our church. So really appreciative. I think that's how all the staff feel every time we're in there. This is amazing. So we're really appreciative of those who gave.
Yeah, for sure. When I walk through there all the time, I'm always like blown away because I just go, man, like what in the world? Like this is awesome. Because it just is such a transformation up there in that space. From a space that no one wanted to go up into before to a space that everyone wants to go up into now. So
yeah. And it was kind of a journey to get there as well, because it's difficult when you're looking at things the way that they are currently. And then you think about, it's going to take this much work, it's going to take this much investment. And you almost have this hesitancy to move forward. But the impact of actually taking that step and moving forward with these visions and dreams and seeing the huge impact that they're having, and in this case, not just on our team, but also everybody who is leading, cheering at Bethany, all the people who come in, I just feel so blessed to be in that space. It is a bit of a battle, though, and so that's kind of what I feel like as we're reading through 1 Samuel 2, that there's all these challenges, these obstacles between the present reality and what God has promised David, and yet each step of the way they're getting closer, they're taking one step closer to that dream being fulfilled, and when it is fulfilled, it's going to be so good, but then there's all these things that lead up to it, and it's the same, I think, with any project.
Yeah. It's funny because I was sitting there, I was listening to you, and then I looked over at my hat. I'm wearing the Celebrity Cruises hat. This is for Barb Armstrong. Hey, just on a side note, Barb Armstrong, which is our best friend's mom and dad, were able to come on the trip as well. And her and her husband Stan won the cornhole tournament on the boat, and
that's crazy.
It was pretty cool. They're like these. She's 71 and her and her husband are as fit as can be. They're just like, they were, it was awesome. Anyways, we don't get into all that, but I was just thinking about, this trip, because we just got back from like this dream vacation. We went to Paris and we were in Greece and we did all these Greece islands and we did this cruise. And then we stayed afterwards and we did the Acropolis and did Paul's missionary journey tour. And
it was amazing.
It was like jam packed. Disneyland Paris. Like all these different, it was a dream vacation, honestly. And God just, so blessed us through our friends, and their generosity was just crazy. But all that to say was there was so much leading up to that trip, though, like to be prepared and pack and all the different things that had to happen to get there, and, COVID tests and, this vaccine and this and all these different things, to lead up to this incredible experience. And that's what we really see in Samuel, is like this whole thing unfolding of like this story where we see David and we see him coming into being king here later, but the incredible story that was all connected to that. There was so much that led up to that moment. Yesterday in the chapter, we saw easily David could have taken Saul out.
Yeah.
But he knew that God's ways were different. Now, what's interesting though, in this chapter today, is it's funny because David shows respect to someone who's in a superior position. But then in someone who's a peer, he kind of struggles with it a little bit, as we'll kind of see here in a moment, because his struggle is when he sees that he's being disrespected for the what he's been offered, his response is a little bit more, I would say, more of a fleshly response. And he's like, saddle up, boys. Like,
Yeah.
he's ready to take them out in response to, like, okay, let's get 400 guys together. We're going to take care of this. So we're going to wipe out, Nabal and all of his servants, every male servant he has. We're going to, he says, strap on your swords, which would have been like the equivalent of, saddle up, boys.
Yeah.
All these different
Definitely
responses. So
yeah, I think too. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
I kind of get the impression, just reading through scripture, that David is very much like a words of affirmation guy. Like, words are hugely important to him. Not only the words that he sings to God in the Psalms and the way he expresses what he's been through, but you see these moments where like words have a huge impact on King David or David. So you have Nabal, who is just an idiot, and he has a reputation for being an idiot. Like, David is a warlord. I think we really have to get away from this concept of David as King Arthur surrounded by the Knights of Camelot. This is not about chivalry. This is a Middle Eastern context. And these are malcontents. These are people who are discontented with the government. They are, they're escaping debt. They're escaping, the current administration. They've banded around David, and they're used to raiding. They raid Philistine towns. They're warriors. And so for somebody like Nabal to basically write a check with his mouth that his butt cannot cash, is insane. But Nabal, he hits David in the worst possible way. He is so condescending. You almost wonder, he was a descendant of Caleb, and that apple dropped far from that tree. He was nothing like his ancestor, clearly, but he was obviously very wealthy. He had inherited a huge amount of influence and power, and he's taking that for granted. It's almost like virtue by association. Just because he's a descendant of Caleb, he gets to do whatever he wants. And then he says this stuff to David, just totally pushes David's buttons. And then it's interesting, Abigail's response is the opposite. She just showers David with all of this affirmation. You're going to be king, ignore my husband. He's an idiot. Everybody knows he's an idiot. That's why he's an idiot. She's doing everything she can to heal the wound that Nabal created. And that's one of the things I think that makes her so wise, so sensible. She recognizes not only who David is, but the right way to approach him. And I think sometimes in life, that's half the battle. It's not just knowing what needs to be done. It's knowing how it needs to be done, the right way to do it. And so I think that's part of why David has this, he's going to fix the problem himself. Nabal shouldn't have spoken to him that way. Yeah.
And I think part of it goes to when people get so caught up in their own wealth, their own ability, there's this cockiness that arrives in them. And we know that Nabal, right? That's how you pronounce it?
Nabal.
Okay. Nabal.
I don't know. I'm not Jewish, so maybe they have a different way.
I would have said Nabal. I like Nabal better. So Nabal, what's interesting is when Abigail actually gets the goods together, quote unquote, to give to David as a gift, doing basically what Nabal should have done, she easily is able to pull together, 400 sheep or something. I mean, I don't know, it's something pretty extreme, which really goes to speak to the prosperity that Nabal had. Because for her to be able to pull that together on such a short period of time just speaks to they had extreme wealth. And I think what had happened was basically Nabal was like, dude, I've got this. I've got all this wealth. I don't need anyone. I know that he's been protecting, but who's David anyways? I didn't even ask him for that, yeah, maybe he has been doing that, but but he doesn't even acknowledge that. It's almost like he's this self-made man who doesn't need any help from the Lord, doesn't need any help from anyone else. And so he chooses to not even recognize him, not even to recognize David. In fact, what was in the beginning? Oh, very rich, 3,000 sheep he had and 3,000 goats. And I think for us, we're going to go, well, I mean, that's quite a bit, but I don't know. Is that a lot? That's a lot.
Imagine having 3,000 cars in your backyard. Yeah, I got 3,000.
Yeah.
3,000 of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah, and I got another 3,000 sent over at my buddy's house. So
yeah. It is. It's incredibly wealthy. And even to see the difference between Nabal and Abigail, for a man like him to get a woman like her, could you imagine being Abigail's parents? Yeah, I know he's an idiot, sweetheart, but he's rich. He can take care of you.
Yeah.
Well, how did they set that up?
It was probably an arranged marriage. So okay, so here's an interesting fact, Amanda. So only 3 times in the Bible are women mentioned for their beauty. And so it would have been Esther, Rachel, and Abigail. They're the only 3 who are mentioned as beautiful. No, I don't. Was Sarah mentioned for her beauty?
Yeah, I think so. But it is only those few people. Yeah, it's very rarely mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the commentaries I was reading through was saying that it was 3. It could be 4. But anyways, all to say, it's interesting that her beauty and her wisdom are the things that are mentioned. She's beautiful and she's wise. And so her beauty had to have carried some, I mean, she had to have been, in my words, she had to have been smoking hot, because it's probably an arranged marriage, which means that in order for her to be connected with a man of so much wealth and things, there had to have been something significant that was being brought to the table.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe it was her beauty and her wisdom in there. And I think what's interesting is how she continues to trust God in it. And I will say this, I don't think necessarily that she is disrespectful to her husband. She almost is
either.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we can think, well, my husband's a fool, he's an idiot, In fact, one of the commentaries I was reading said that Nabal means fool. His name means fool. So to think about that his name literally means fool, to think about the foolishness that he's showing in this moment. And Abigail comes in and with this beauty and just wisdom is I can make right what my husband should have done. I'm going to spare his life. And then, of course, in the end, we see how God takes care of it. And, what did you think about that when it said, he turns basically to stone for 10 days? Isn't that what it's something like that? What do you think that could have meant?
I don't know. It's interesting, I think, to think of the role faith played in all of this. Because Abigail isn't just somebody who's diplomatically intelligent. She says some things. She's the first person to acknowledge, other than Jonathan, that David's going to be king. So there's almost something, I'm not saying that she is prophetic, because the word never says that, but there's something prophetic about the way Abigail speaks over David. And I think it's that faith. I mean, faith is the only thing that pleases God. And for her to go back to Nabal, the fact that she's giving him an account of what she did, I think he realized this, and she probably told him too, David was ready to kill all of you. Nabal, this is what I keep mentioning to you. You have to be careful what you say. I think the shock of what happened and how close he was to death, something about that. Plus, for somebody who's always partying and drinking, they're not going to be the healthiest anyway. And we also don't know how old he was. He could have been significantly older than Abigail. For him to be that wealthy at this point and be the head of the household, he could have been older too. So it's probably just a combination of things. But also, David acknowledged afterwards that God brought justice. So it's
Yeah.
almost like when Abigail came back to Nabal and said, okay, this is what almost happened, and this is what I did to rectify the issue. She gave an account of herself, which is putting herself in a vulnerable position. It's one thing to go to a reasonable husband and say, honey, this is a situation that came up, and I put this much on the credit card to prevent this other thing from happening. It's another thing to go to, an idiot, and you don't know how he's going to react, and you don't know how he's going to treat you, and he could technically have any wife he wants. And I don't know that she had a lot of, job security necessarily, but to give an account and kind of put herself out there and put herself in God's hands, and then God takes care of it. So
Yeah.
there seems to be that divine agency in response to Abigail's faith, in response to her. She is being respectful. She's giving an account. And then also God's, honoring David. I mean, just think about it. Abigail is connected with incredible wealth in Hebron, and Hebron is a huge, influential area. If you have influence in Hebron, then you've arrived. And so David's marriage with Abigail later on, it's not just romantic; it's strategic.
Yeah.
For somebody like the widow goes with the property, like that's when you're talking about rights of restoration, to, like we see with Ruth and Boaz. If you're going to claim a dead man's property, and then you have to also, with that, I forget the word, there's a biblical term for it, but you also have the wife, like you inherit her too. And that's how Boaz got Ruth, because there was a kinsman who was willing to redeem, that's the word. He was willing to redeem the land, but he didn't want to have a wife along with it. He already had a wife and kids. He didn't want to jeopardize the inheritance that his children were going to get. So Boaz happily took both Ruth the Moabitess and I think it was Elimelech's or Mahlon or Kilion's land as well. So in this context, Nabal is dead. David didn't have to kill him, so nobody can say he just took power in Hebron. Like, God gave it to him, and he has this very advantageous match with Abigail, and then through Abigail has control of all of Hebron. So it was like hugely strategic for him to do this.
And I think there's something too to be said of David. Like, I'm sure there was strategy and everything that was used in there, and in his mind there's some of that. I do think though that not only was he captivated by her wisdom, but he was captivated by her. I mean, not only was he captivated by her beauty, but he was captivated by her wisdom.
Yeah.
And the reason why we see that is because later he says to her, after she shared these things, he basically says to her, blessed, he's blessed is your advice and blessed are you. It's interesting because David actually is receiving words from a woman.
Yeah.
Which I know right now that's not as big of a deal. Like, we don't necessarily look and think, oh, that's that big deal. But this is a big deal. Like,
oh yeah,
a woman is pleading, she's sharing something, he recognizes it. And so, like, even just the way she responds, like, so she's out front and she has the gift of the skins and the sheep and those things right up front. Like, she knows, okay, my beauty is here. I know that these gifts are what my husband should have done, but he didn't.
mm-hmm.
And I'm going to speak wisely. I'm going to actually think through my words. I'm not going to just off the cuff this thing, and David then receives her advice and basically praises her for it. And I love that. Like, I think it speaks to what can happen in our lives. And I'll just say this as a man, when I recognize the wisdom that God places in other ladies, that when I recognize that and I honor that, it opens up a whole nother door of God's blessings in our lives versus men that are like, women should be silent and these different things. And I'm not trying to make it all about that, but David receives it from her and then actually turns from a, like, remember, he makes a vow before this. He basically says something along the lines of, like, let it not be, like, I can't remember where it was. It was right before she says stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to basically slaughter these guys, every single one of them.
Yeah.
Then she speaks. And so he doesn't, he changes his mind and heeds what she says, which is incredible.
Well, even the initiative that Abigail took, and when you think of some of the stereotypes or what typical behavior that we would expect of women in this period, an issue comes up and they are in the background, and it's the men who decide how to act. But notice that the servants go to her. She had a reputation, and that's actually what stood out to me when I was soaping. It's this idea of having a good reputation.
Mm.
And so for the servants to go to Abigail, not a male relative of Nabal, not the head or chief servant or some other powerful man in that family, they go straight for Abigail. Like, Abigail, you got to fix this.
Yeah.
Like, what do we need to do? Because everyone around her recognized that she was a woman of intelligence, that she was wise. Abigail can fix this. Can you imagine how many times Abigail had to fix things?
Because of her husband, yeah.
This could have been a long time coming, like Nabal had been like going around saying all kinds of things to all kinds of people. I very much doubt this was the first time he'd mouthed off to someone, and thought he could get away with it. So people are going to Abigail like, Abigail, this is bad. Like, David's men were great to us, but they are also formidable warriors. Like, we're in danger. Please help. So for them to go to Abigail for a solution at a time when their life is in danger, I think speaks volumes to the reputation that she had garnered as a woman of wisdom. And so, I was looking through the word to find other references to good reputation. And there was the one that stands out about women in particular. It talks about in 1 Peter 3 or 1 Peter chapter 3, it says, you should clothe yourself instead with the beauty that comes from within, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit or tranquil spirit, which is so precious to God. This is how the holy women of old made themselves beautiful. They put their trust in God and accepted the authority of their husbands. So, Abigail does that. She could have stepped back. Like, if she was really a scheming mind, like, honestly, if I was in Abigail's position and I had been mistreated by my husband and saw him make all these terrible choices, I might just like run off and hide in the hills. I'm like, you know what? This is just desserts. David can take him out, then I'm out. I'm free. But she doesn't do that. Like, she actually, it might sound disrespectful, but she's saving Nabal's life. And because this is a matter of life and death, it justifies the extreme actions that she goes to try to preserve not only her husband, but also all the household servants. Like, David was going to kill all the men.
Yeah.
Like, he was going to wipe them all out. So Abigail is putting her self-interest on the back burner, and she is actually protecting her husband, even though he probably doesn't deserve it. And as a result of her actually being respectful to her husband, God himself is the one who says, okay, I'm going to release you so you no longer have to bear that burden of trying to cover up for Nabal's mistakes, and I'm going to give you a better husband, as a result. Yeah. So, like, it's interesting the reputation she had and how she really does demonstrate true beauty in the sense that she put her trust in God.
Yeah. And I think that's the key right there, Amanda, that you just said, was she puts her trust in the Lord. She says, basically, I'm going to trust that he knows best. Mm-hmm. If God wants me out of this, he'll take care of it. Like, but I'm going to come. And when she comes to David and she says, because it reads this, it says, so she fell at his feet. On me, my Lord, on me, let this iniquity be. Like, and that's what I think was crazy too, was she basically says, listen, I know it's my husband who did this, but I'm willing to be in his place. Like, don't kill him. Don't kill all the other servants. Don't kill all them. Like, take me. Like, she offers herself up as a sacrifice, basically. Yeah. Let it be on me. And then she says, let the Lord not regard this scoundrel Nabal, or Nabal, for his name is, so he is. Like, it's almost like, hey, his name literally means the fool. And so, like, just know this, like, we recognize this is the fool's decision, what he did here. But please, please, listen to me. Please let me be the one. So then it says, as the Lord lives and so my soul lives, since the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed and avenging yourself from my own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek harm for my Lord be as Nabal. I mean, like, she like goes into this whole thing of like pleading and making, asking for David to recognize these moments here. And it really, like, I don't know, like, I think the thing that really stood out to me was how she stands, like the song, Stand by Your Man. Like that whole thing, like she stands by her man, even in the midst of like knowing he's a fool, even in the midst of knowing he's done wrong, even in the midst, like, she's like, I can make this right. I'll give the gift. I'll offer myself. Like, she recognizes all of that. And then at the end it says, but when the Lord has dealt with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. Like,
Yes.
he's going to him from a place of humility. And I think that one of the things for me, so being on this past trip, like, we stayed at like really nice places, and and that's how it is when you go to many other countries. You kind of see the extremes of wealth and poor, and just
Yeah.
the great distance between the two. And there's something to be said about humility.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we humble ourselves and we carry a humble approach towards others, it opens up other doors. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't live humble lives so that the doors are opened, but we live humble lives because we recognize that we are servants to Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and we're servants to the gospel. Like, and when we take that approach, I think God then sees that and honors that. And that's what he does with Abigail. She takes the approach of servant to David, like you said earlier, is one of the only ones who really recognizes him as king. And yet we see that humble approach that she takes of giving of her wealth, giving of her resources, doing what's right, using wisdom. And you see it now. And what's crazy is she's beautiful too. So she didn't just rely upon her beauty. She didn't go to him and try to, like, seduce him, like,
Yeah.
hey, David, how are you, big boy? Like, like that, like, she uses wisdom with beauty.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said. Like, that's one of the things I love. And like, I think Kasha's a very beautiful woman, but she also has extreme wisdom. She doesn't just use her beauty on there. She uses the wisdom as well. So anyways, I love this chapter. I thought there was so many great takeaways today, to be able to soak and really kind of dig into. Other thoughts, Amanda?
Yeah. So when you're talking about humility, it really is about wisdom. Even the New Testament talks about the humility that comes with wisdom. And the benefit of wisdom is it helps put things in perspective. Where, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? Having a good understanding, knowing where everything comes from, being able to honor the Lord and living to please him, that's the beginning of wisdom. And when we're talking about a good reputation and somebody like Abigail who has earned it, Proverbs 22:1 says, choose a good reputation over great riches. Being held in high esteem is better than silver or gold. And so even just the drive, I think that many of us have and in the culture to like acquire things, to make ourselves look successful in the kingdom, that's not actually the measure of success. Really, our focus should be on earning a good reputation, like demonstrating faithfulness, being wise, obeying God. I think Nabal he's almost like a caricature of somebody who devotes themselves to wealth and greed, but has no character. and doesn't have a good reputation. And just think how quickly he's erased and replaced with somebody else. But somebody like Abigail goes on to have an enduring legacy,
Mm.
something where, her children are recorded in scripture, and she has a huge impact because she has a good reputation. And so that humility is actually evidence of wisdom, and humility accompanies wisdom. And so for Abigail to be truly wise, I still think, like, hearing her words, to me, they strike me as so prophetic. May your enemies be as Nabal. Like,
Mm.
Nabal hadn't died yet. And yet Abigail recognized, like, he's come against the Lord's anointed. Something's going to go down. May your
Yeah.
enemy be as Nabal. So for her to speak that, and also the respect she showed David, she was showing respect to her future husband. So remember me, your maidservant. Why would David need to remember her? So the things that she's saying, it's like prophetic. Like, I know who you are. I know God has got you and he's going to establish you. Something's going to happen to Nabal because he did this against you. But don't you take that into your own hands, David, because God is going to take care of Nabal for you. Like, she is, like, honoring her future husband, which is a tremendous act of faith. So for her to exercise not only this degree of prudence in rectifying Nabal's stupidity, but
Mm-hmm.
for her to also just be in such alignment with what God was doing and to help David regain that perspective. There are things that you could be justified in doing to get the throne and things you couldn't be, like slaying a member of your tribe. People would have accused David of trying to seize power himself. So Abigail's recognizing, like, if you want to legitimize your claim that God has anointed you, don't take this into your own hands and make this happen. Let God give you the victory. And so she really helps David to win this huge victory where he is able to gain a lot of influence over Hebron without ever having to shed any blood. So
Yeah.
just this
Yeah.
amazing example, not only of humility and wisdom, but faith.
And I love that because he makes the right decision in the cave chapter before.
Mm-hmm.
His flesh gets a hold of him. His flesh now is, I'm angry. This man's wronged me. Like, listen, like, you don't even know what I've been going through. Right. So he wants to take it. Then she comes in with humility and wisdom, basically talks him off the cliff, and you're right. Like, if he had taken Saul's life prior, in the chapter prior, people would have accused him of, okay, he's just taking it, and it wouldn't have been God appointing him. God put him in that place. God, and same thing with all this wealth that now he's going to have access to through this marriage and all of that. And what's interesting, and kind of we'll land the plane here shortly, but the end of the chapter, I don't know if you caught this, but at the end, David basically, says to his servants, hey, go get her. I want to make her my wife, this whole moment. And then right at the end, it says this, it says, and this is Abigail who's saying this. She said, here is your maidservant, a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. So think about this. Abigail doesn't even allow, like, the success. She's a woman of great wealth. She's a woman of success. If anyone should have had their feet washed, it probably should have been her. So now she's married David. She's married to David. Nabal's dead, right? So this arrogant, like, just, mouthy husband of hers, he's dead, like, all these things. And then she greets David's servants with one of the greatest acts of humility and basically says, I will wash your feet. Like, not like the servants of David, I will wash your feet. And I think it just speaks to this great humility and how humility then opens these other doors for her. Yeah. And I think the same thing applies to us today. Like, the big takeaway for me was just this idea of humility is what opens the door. And
that's
how in my life, if I live a life of humility, it will open other doors. I don't have to open those doors. And really, in many ways, like, that's like we've tried to do that with our friendships, with the relationships with others around us. Like we want to serve others. I don't feel like, oh, I've arrived, I've gotten to some place of stature or somehow arrived, because now I'm older or this or that. It's like, no, I want to remain humble in there. And my flesh does come up at times where it's like, oh no, I want that. I like there's this wealth side of it, and like, oh, I like the designer clothes or something like that, like, because it speaks to that. But you said something earlier that really hit me, was just, it's not about our wealth and the things that we've acquired, but it's really our reputation. And like that speaks higher. And you're right, Nabal is forgotten about. Like we'll literally continue reading, and as this story unfolds, and we'll never think about him again. Right? We'll just think, oh, he was a fool. And that's not how I want to be remembered.
No, we want to have like an enduring legacy.
Yeah. Oh, I had a lot of money. I had all these things, but I was a fool. No, I don't want that. So it's good.
Me either.
So humility opens doors.
It does. And it precedes honor. Yeah. I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said?
I said girl power.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the Holy Spirit's power too. And it is encouraging to see him work through this moment. And I think also you see that balance of male leadership in David and female leadership in Abigail, and how oftentimes, I think that's the key. Culturally, I think that's been missing. Like we have a tendency to go to extremes. Like it's like extremely patriarchal, and then it's extremely the opposite way, and both have deficits. I really love the book of Nehemiah, where it talks about the king with the queen sitting beside him, and then he gives Nehemiah everything that Nehemiah needs in order to help rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And so I think the goal, and this was the goal since the Garden of Eden, was to have masculine kind of leadership and feminine leadership together. And really that there's a good balance between the two approaches. Women have a tendency to analyze a bit more and then also be more compassionate. And men have a tendency to be able to make quick, decisive decisions and read the terrain pretty quickly and come to the right conclusion. So if you have too much of a stereotypical male leadership, then you can miss a lot of opportunities, or just say like my way is the right way, and ignore the impact that has on people. If you have too much feminine leadership, I think there's almost too much consideration for how people feel and accepting too many things that probably aren't advantageous. So to have a good balance between the two, you're able to make take decisive action, but you're also able to balance that by being aware of the impact that has on other people and other opportunities that would otherwise be missed. So just in this one chapter, like a great picture of what happens when you have a balance between masculine style leadership and feminine style leadership. And our culture's almost gone the other way, where it's become like men are being disrespected. And as a woman, I hate that. I absolutely hate it. I will not let my girls watch any show where the dad is dumb. Like that is a no-no for our family. And that's almost like culturally acceptable. But I also don't let them watch ones where it's like the women are almost like worshipped. It's like that's not accurate. Like we both need each other. In Christ, man is not independent of woman or woman of man. And like that's in the New Testament. Like we need each other. And that's the goal, to have that balance.
And I think that's the beauty of the marriage picture.
Yeah.
The bride, the bride of Christ, so the church, with the groom, with Christ, and how those two, like, and I still believe this. I believe that the church is the hope of the world. Like God wants to use the church, like the bride of Christ, to display his love. How will they know that you are followers? By your love one for another. Like, how are people going to see this? What's going to happen there? And I think people see it through our marriages as well.
Yeah.
Like two people, like not competing, but two people working together and recognizing the strengths and the beauties that they have. And here's what I've learned through the years. And man, I don't have time to get into all that, But like some of the greatest strengths of like your spouse are sometimes the things that rub you the most. Like they're some of the hardest things. And that's the beauty when we, with a humble heart, actually say, no, I'm going to recognize the beauty and the strength of that person. And so in closing, we're going through the airport and it's a little stressful and things. You got to have COVID tests and all these things, and they want paperwork, and no one knows what, honestly, in the airports, no one knows what really needs to happen and where people need to go. And people are just trying to figure it out. It's a little chaotic overseas. And so we're sitting there going through, and we're on the airplane, and I'm one who I like to have everything in my hands, and like, I want the passports, I want everything there. And Kasha just takes and says, I'll help you. And she says, it's actually a strength of mine, and you don't have to be the one always in charge. You know what I mean? Like, and it was like, you didn't say it in a disrespectful way. Like, she was just kind of like, hey, let me help. Like, a strength of mine is organizing things and putting them in a way. And so she did. She had all the passports opened up and the vaccine cards in and the letter, like all the different things that needed to happen. And she organized it all really well. And she's like, let me do that. You can still lead. You can still be the guy who's, running us through the airport. Because then when we got to Paris, we had less than an hour. So we had 45 minutes. And we had to go into another terminal. And it was crazy. Still had to go through customs and all this stuff. And so we just made our flight. It was a tight connection. But anyways, like, I had to recognize that. And I think that's the beauty, is when we recognize that with one another, we humble ourselves. Humbleness then opens a new door. Some of the greatest couples that we look at and go, man, I wish I had a marriage like that. It's because people are willing to humble themselves and say, you know what, I'm gonna look to take care of my spouse. Like, I'm gonna do that. It's like people will say this about the church today. They'll go like, I love Jesus, but I can't stand the church. And it's like, you can't. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Like I can't say, well, I love Brian, but I don't love my wife. Like, it's like, and if someone comes to me and says, Brian, I think you're the greatest guy ever, but I can't stand your wife, I'm gonna be like, we're not friends. Like, we can't hang out. Like, I don't want to be around you. Like, I don't want you in my life if you don't love and respect my wife.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same way right now. We have to be careful. Like, so many people are saying, like, I'm the watchman on the wall. My responsibility is to call up the church and all the things. It's like, well, you need to be careful. Like, you need to be really, really careful. And you know what? Maybe you should actually pray before you post.
Oh, yeah.
Like, ask the Lord, like, say, God, do you really want me to post this? Do you really want me to share this blog that some angry, disillusioned Christian, wrote about the church?
And they don't realize the judgment they bring on themselves, because if you are a watchman on the wall and you don't give the correct warning, the word is clear that God holds the watchman responsible for not reporting the breach. So you have all these people who are like self-proclaimed prophets, and they don't realize the judgment they bring on themselves by putting themselves in that role. If they're not supposed to be in that role, they're not going to be able to execute it properly. And then when things happen that they didn't accurately warn about, then God would hold them responsible because they put themselves in that position. It's kind of like, do not desire many of you to become teachers, because those who teach are going to be held to, a higher standard. They're going to be judged a little more harshly. So, yeah, I wouldn't want to label myself anything that God himself hadn't labeled me, because then I put myself under a higher level of accountability.
Yeah. And I think if people would just pray about it and ask the Lord, the Lord would, I think many times would say, yeah, don't share that. Like, I'm just so tired of seeing the church getting beat up. It's like, I don't want to walk. Like, could you imagine if I'm walking around and Kasha has a black eye every day? People would start questioning, like, and I could say, well, I didn't do it. But people would start questioning, well, what kind of husband are you if you're going to let your wife walk around with, like, why are you letting people beat her up? And my thing is I do think that Christ is, I just think, I don't know. Anyways, it's not, we gotta stop. Sorry. I got to stop. Let's
No,
love.
I can
Let's
appreciate
love
that.
let's love the church even in the midst of their brokenness. Is
Yeah.
there things that we see happen? And yes, yes, there is. But I still believe in the church. I believe in community and believe God still wants to use it.
Yeah.
So yes, let's do it. Like, yes, yes. So anyways,
Yeah, I
let's
love
learn
that.
to
The
pray.
humility opens doors.
It does. All right. Well, we love you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks, Amanda, for joining. It was great to be with you today. I'm
Yeah,
back
I love it.
home. Family's all back home. I'm excited to bring the word this Sunday. We'll see you guys. Well, they'll see you tomorrow. They'll
Yes,
see
that's
you
right. Me and
tomorrow.
my husband will
Yeah.
be bringing the word together.
Yep. It'll be good. All right, everybody. Have a great Tuesday. See ya.
Right?